Welcome to the Feisty Women's Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Sara Gross, Ironman champion, PhD in women's history, and founder and CEO of Feisty Media. I started this show because I wanted to cut through the BS of diet culture and fitness culture and actually learn from high-achieving women at the top of their game who have figured out how to feel and perform their best at every stage of life. So I chat with experts, elite athletes, and leaders who have learned to succeed despite the massive gender data gap in exercise and medical science and product development. Every episode is filled with information, advice, and anecdotes that will help you fulfill your potential as an athlete, mom, leader, or business owner. And listen up. If you don't subscribe to our Women's Performance newsletter, you are definitely missing out. It's totally free. So head over to womensperformance.com and subscribe now. That's womensperformance.com. This podcast is a production of Feisty Media. Hello, Feisties. Okay, before we get started today, I just want to give a little shout out to one of our longtime partners who I spoke to just the other day, so it's top of mind, Previnex. I'm sure many of you, am someone who is a little bit skeptical about the supplement industry. So it's been super refreshing to work with Previnex and the team there because I know I can trust their products because I know the people behind the products. I currently use their joint health and immune health supplements, as well as their vegan protein powder, which I also love. So if you like not being sick and decreased joint discomfort, I highly, highly recommend. Okay, so today's episode, I'm talking to Dr. Emma Ross. This was such a fun conversation. She is an exercise physiologist and the head of physiology at the English Institute for Sport. Get this here, she led the British sports science team through the Rio and Tokyo Olympics. So she knows a lot about human performance. Emma is also one of the founders of the Well HQ, which is an organization designed to empower women in health, in work, and in life. The Well HQ recently released a book called The Female Body Bible about all things women's health. After the Rio 2016 Olympics, Emma said, "Great Britain was described as a sporting superpower. We won more medals than ever and finished second in the table. It was exceptional, but how could we continue to improve?" I realized, she said, that the answer wasn't in marginal gains, but by tapping into something more fundamental, the female part of the female athlete. So Emma and I discuss how the menstrual cycle affects our performance as athletes and as humans, and how we can use the information we have to be our best at every part of the month. We also discuss contraception, fueling, and everything she's learned working with high-performance women. If you're an active woman, this interview is not to be missed. Hi, Emma. I'm so glad that you're here today on the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we met actually briefly last week at the Female Athlete Conference. I know a lot of people are really kind of curious, especially our audience around what's the new information, about women's performance. But what were some of your main takeaways from the conference?
Yeah, it wasn't a good week. It was, honestly, I got there, the first day I was there, I went to the pre-conference, there was a day which was more clinical, so it was more applied. There was nutritionists, clinicians. Mm-hmm. And from 9 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock in the evening, I was so focused and engaged. I was like, oh, I'm never going to be able to do this for 3 more days. I did. I think I was slightly flagging by the last day, but I've never been to a conference. I've been to that conference virtually in COVID, but never live. And just where all the topics are so relevant to my work, but also really engaging speakers. And I think for me, the main takeaway, I think there was two. One was I had a real overwhelming feeling that we've made progress. And I was sat in a
Interesting. Mm-hmm.
I sat in a female athlete conference must have been about 6 years ago in the UK, and it was kind of a similar but smaller event. And I just kind of at the time was a bit disappointed at the quality of the research, because this was a field that, you know, we knew there was a gap to research in this space. And people were kind of rushing into it a little bit and going, okay, well, that's great, I'll research females. And they were doing it really poorly. And so I just had this kind of like, oh gosh, this isn't going to do us any good. But fast forward to last week when, you know, we just saw really, really credible, robust research. And I think for me, the main theme was, how do we get this into the hands of coaches? Like whether we were talking about red S, or whether we were talking about return to play from pregnancy, or whether we were talking about menstrual cycle and how to integrate that into, you know, coaching and training. There was so much conversation about how do we distill this from what is a research paper or a review paper of lots of research into the hands of coaches so that they can then, you know, use it in their practice. And that's so much more easily said than done. So there was some really great discussions, and we had some, I mean, in the UK here, we're just working with the FA in women's football, and we're about to roll out a sort of training course, kind of a half-day training course that will be mandated for everyone working in the Women's Super League and the Women's Championship. And that's kind of like a really good question. Like, should this stuff be mandated for women working with girls? So for people working with girls and women in sport, and that's a great question. Like, you know, we could, and I really enjoyed talking with the sort of coach educators about that.
Yeah. And so should it be mandated?
I think the consensus we got, because we had there were some brilliant panels on safeguarding and keeping women safe in sport, and about physical and emotional abuse. And someone's comment was that training is mandated. So a lot of coaches, well, all the coaches have to go, but when they're there, they're not engaged, and they're kind of, you know, doing it as a tick box, kind of having a snooze in the back. Right. And it's like, how can we avoid that? How can we make it feel so important to do this? But I was talking to Julie McCleary, and she was kind of saying, look, we need to professionalize coaching slightly more. And in different countries, it's different. In some countries, you have to have a degree just kind of to coach anyone. In the UK, we rely really heavily on volunteers, and we have coaching right down at grassroots. And our sport is quite formalized. So coaching is still quite formalized, but it's not professionalized unless you work at the elite level. And that makes kind of mandating training and having kind of a minimum standard of practice really, really hard. And then the question is, well, if you put that in, would you lose all the coaches? Because, you know, the volunteering, they're giving their time. If you put these barriers to entry in, would they not come? And actually, we just had some great discussion. And I think at the moment, I would like to see training mandated around women and girls, because we know that there's a duty of care issue. Like, we had lots of presentations about red S, about bone health, about, you know, the impact of not looking after girls in sport on their long-term health. And if we get it wrong, even at the grassroots, if we get it wrong, there is really important implications for women's health across their lifespan. So I think at the moment, I would like to see something mandated. And that means lobbying for a change in policy, because, you know, that's a big change to ask for. But I would like to see that.
Yeah. You know, as someone who, and I'm sure you're the same, like, is kind of in the business of distilling information, you know, on our side, I think a lot of our listeners are actually athletes, or just kind of like lifelong people who are like lifelong active. And we're trying to take the information from places like Female Athlete Conference and distill it down. But did you at some point, because I that was thematically one of the things that kept, at some point I felt like just like putting up my hand and going like, hey, like, there's all these resources, you know, like, I know you all wrote a book. We have a podcast. There's lots of other people doing great things on the internet. Like, how do you see the Well HQ kind of positioned in regards to that, like, distillation of information, I guess?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because we had the academics who were doing brilliant research, and we had some coaches in the room who were, you know, really at the coalface with the athletes, working really hard on performance. And neither of them are incentivized to kind of, like, the academics aren't really incentivized to distill their research right down to the coach level and the athlete level. And the coaches and the athletes are far too busy to, you know, to kind of go into the journals and read these papers and then try and, like, you know, unscience speak it,
figure out what it means.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think there is a big space for, things like your podcast, things like our work, where we're trying our very hardest to kind of bring the evidence and what we know from the research and distill it down into something that's really usable. And I think that's one of the lessons we've learned at the Well, because that's essentially the space we tried to sort of occupy, that translation. And something we've really noticed is that the work you have to do to take the research and make it usable. It's not just a case of saying, oh, I'm going to take out, the complicated words. I mean, that's really patronizing for the end user, right? It's actually like, as a coach, I'm seeing this athlete twice a week. Like, what the heck am I going to do about menstrual cycle or sports bras? Or like, what bit of this comes into my scope of practice? And what exactly does good practice look like? So, and I think that's the really important bit that we are missing. But like you say, there's lots of good stuff going on, but it's like connecting it all, isn't it? It's like an electrical circuit. Like if you connect it, then it will be amazing.
Yeah, it's hard. It really is hard to connect those dots. Like recently we created an online course about fueling for female athletes, right? And we had like an exercise physiology piece. And then we had like a culture, body image, diet culture piece. And then we had the nutrition piece. But actually and we had 3 different experts on those things. But then actually when we looked at it, we're like, oh, we need to connect the dots on this. So like, well, we're not really sure how those dots connect. Right? Like how does what we just learned about exercise physiology, about perimenopause or puberty, the things that are in the physiology section, like, yeah, they connect somehow to nutrition, but we're still at that place where like, there's not like a groundswell of information about like how we're just trying things and seeing how they connect. Like, do you find that in your work as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like, sport and fitness, it is quite a nice playground if you've got enough information. Like if you can play around with your with your body, your responses as an athlete. If someone says, oh, like training at this time of your menstrual cycle might do that, we don't really know, but you could think, well, what's the harm? Like I could try it and I could play and I could see what my response looks like. So I think we're in this nice space where we can kind of play around with what we do know and see if it works without almost the pressure of going, God, I need to do this right and it will definitely work. But yeah, I think partly it's that all of it comes down to perception and behavior, and that's kind of a real the human element of it, isn't it? So and I think we can sometimes get lost. I know there was a lot of talk at the conference around the menstrual cycle, and actually it swung quite, in some sort of echo chambers that we exist in, probably it's swung quite far the other way. So we went from never talking about the menstrual cycle, not considering that hormonal rhythm at all, to, I got an email just this week from someone who said, oh, I firmly believe that, we should all be training, along with the menstrual cycle and with that, focused on that. And I'm like, no,
like the cycle syncing people like way over far somewhere.
Don't do that. Like, we need to lay in the middle ground, which is like obviously integrating it into our practice and our conversations. But it's a bit like, sleep is another very important biological rhythm, but we would never train specifically based on the quality of sleep we had the night before, or like we just would integrate that information into our context of how we feel. So I think it's an interesting space, because sometimes, having just kind of the physiology data then allows people to kind of get excited about something and then look at everything through that lens.
Well, and I think it's interesting. I did want to talk about menstrual cycle because that does interest so many people, right? And I think like even when we saw that, I think it was on the last day, there was a research paper showing that like it was like the top 4 things that athletes were interested in learning more about, and they were all related to menstrual cycle or oral contraceptives, etc. Right? And so like there's a reason for that, I think, because like a lot of us know, almost like we realize that there is an effect between our cycles and our exercise performance. And so it's kind of disappointing, I feel like, when we're hearing back from the researchers like, oh, but we don't know anything yet. We don't know enough, even though that's probably realistically where things are at, right? Like, so what do you think? Like, I think, that play off between individuals' experience, right? Like, I know I'm flat a couple days right before my period if I'm trying to do like something long, lift something heavy. Like, are there starting to be trends that emerge or yeah, where are we?
Yeah, I mean, the academics are conservative, and rightly so, like, because they, you know, in their world they need like a critical mass of evidence, and we just don't have that because it doesn't exist yet. We're still building on it. We're definitely seeing trends, and the more research papers that come out, like, the more we're like, oh, that's like adding fuel to that sort of idea. So to give you an example, there was a really nice poster at the conference which was about it was about high speed running in match play training in football.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, and that's a really interesting model because rather than saying like, how strong are you, like what's your maximal voluntary contraction, which doesn't change across the cycle, we just don't have evidence to suggest that it does. Like the capacity of your muscles doesn't change. Now your ability to tap into that strength might change based on how you feel. Like you say, if you feel really flat, if you've got a migraine, if you've got bad period pain, you aren't going to want to do a 1 rep max or a PB. But we broadly know at the moment that things like VO2 max, strength, power, speed don't change across the cycle as determinants of performance. We do know that how people feel changes, but and that's the interesting bit, because the high speed running in training model, that's self-selected pace, right? When you're running around a football pitch or a soccer pitch, you're trying to sprint all out. That's the, you know, you're putting in as much effort as you can, and then we're recording that as how much how much ground you're covering and how much high speed running you're doing. And that followed a pattern across the menstrual cycle that kind of lined up with what we think is happening with the physiology, which is at the end of the follicular phase, when estrogen is really high, estrogen is good for motivation to move. It's good for like, it's anabolic, so we think it's helping with muscle recovery, and all of those things added together make that a really good time to exercise. And when you do something like a small-sided match where you're choosing whether and when to run fast, you end up doing more high-speed running at that time, and then it slowly peters down and is the lowest in the premenstrual phase. So I think those sorts of studies are really interesting because they kind of follow that idea that there are times of the cycle where we might feel more motivated, feel more up for it, feel more energized, and times when we won't. And then there's also research to show there are that kind of follicular phase, late follicular phase, when estrogen is present, that we might recover better. There is that idea that if we strength train more in that phase, we might get better adaptation. Again, we've only got probably about half a dozen studies that are looking at that, but the majority of them do show an effect. And again, there's small sample sizes, so the academics are like, oh, not really sure yet. And training studies are really hard to do with large numbers. But we do have some information. I think it's really easy to say, oh, we just don't know enough. We know tons, actually. We really do. And we managed to write a book, and a big chapter of it is on the menstrual cycle. And some of it is just what we understand about the hormones themselves. So, when people are trying to talk about the hormones in injury, now we don't have good enough evidence to be very definitive about whether there are times in the menstrual cycle where clearly that the hormones are having an impact on injury. We do now have kind of observational data from studies which say injury prevalence is higher before ovulation, and that fits with the theory around estrogen and how it might impact collagen in the joints. But also, what we don't know is if it might be linked to behavior. So estrogen makes us want to take more risks. So when I'm in a match situation, is that going to make you go in for a tackle? So we don't kind of know why yet, but we are seeing patterns that are around behavior and motivation. And I think that's really interesting. And I think we can sort of not be confident in that, but we can, lean into it and as athletes, we can certainly say, does this feel true for me? And if it does, like, how can I adapt my training and my kind of tracking of my cycle to help me get the gains?
Right. That's so interesting. Do you think, or are there trends that show ways that we can mitigate some of what we would consider the more negative effects of the menstrual cycle, like around ovulation or just before menstruation or even during menstruation? Like, what do you recommend for athletes?
Yeah, and I think, because when we do talk about menstrual cycle and performance, I think people skip ahead to that whole, like, could we train in line with the cycle? Will I adapt to strength train better. And for
It's
me,
a big leap,
if you got
right?
yeah, it's a huge leap, isn't it? It's like going to the sort of marginal gains before you've laid some really good foundation. And for me, the foundation is, do you track your cycle? Do you know what your experience of your cycle is? And then on reflection, are there any parts of your cycle which you feel like are holding you back from being able to show up, you know, in your training session, on your gym workout, and be the version of yourself you want to be? And if there are, what are you choosing to do about it? And even if we only got that far with every woman who was active or trying to pursue sport, I think we'd like there'll be a game changer, because I still meet elite athletes, you know, at the highest level of sport who are struggling 2-3 days a month. So and it always shocks me, because I'm like, that we know so much about their bodies and how to manage their joints and their nutrition and everything else, and yet we're not putting enough effort into helping them mitigate the symptoms of the cycle. Because I think we do have good evidence about some diet, lifestyle, exercise factors that can help, and depending on the symptoms and depending on the individual, it will vary. But I think we know we can use micronutrients to help with menstrual cycle symptoms. So we know that magnesium comes out really well when it's either studies of period pain or PMS or menstrual migraine. We know that vitamin E, vitamin D, calcium. So we know that diet can play a really important part. We know that gut health has been linked to menstrual cycle symptoms and estrogen metabolism. So getting rid of estrogen when we don't need it anymore. And if you don't have good gut health, actually your body tends to send it back into your system, which then creates an elevated level of estrogen. And we know that has knock-on effects: heavy periods, bad period pain. So gut health, our diets being broad, including vegetables, like green leafy vegetables and nuts and seeds and all the things we kind of know, like, but that forms a really good basis. And often I think even when trying to manage symptoms, we skip forward to what's the supplement, what's the shiny thing that I can use, the one tablet. And it's like, are we sure that sleep, diet and exercise and stress management are nailed? And if they're not, those things have a huge capacity to influence our experience of the cycle. So it's boring because it's slow, and it's like you have to be intentional about the things in your life that, you know, like eating well, exercising, but not too much, fueling well enough, managing stress, because the hormones of stress, cortisol, you know, really interfere with other hormones and other hormonal systems, and that can knock your menstrual cycle off balance. So unfortunately, like, some of the really basic stuff is critical here.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now I'm hearing bits of like what my next question was really is like the intersection between menstrual cycle symptoms and low energy availability, like where you start to get symptoms of low energy availability and it can cross over or even make, I've heard, you can tell me, that it could make some of the menstrual symptoms worse. Has that been true in your experience?
Well, yeah. So we have, I would, you know, caveat by saying we have no evidence,
right.
But yeah, certainly, the athletes we work with, what's interesting about low energy availability and relative energy deficiency in sport is that we often see athletes when their periods have stopped, they've had a stress fracture, you know, they've had some big red flags. But what we've noticed when we've been doing investigative work with athletes who have kind of got unexplained underperformance, or they just don't feel quite right, we see that they're on a pathway towards those big red flags. But actually what's happened is their cycle has become anovulatory. So their ovulation has stopped because of underfueling. And that's the first, you know, when your brain is kind of deciding to switch off your reproductive system to save energy, the first thing it will do is stop sending the signals to ovulate. And if we don't ovulate, we don't produce one of the main two hormones of the cycle, progesterone. And so we suddenly went from a cycle that's balanced between estrogen and progesterone to one where progesterone doesn't exist and estrogen is just kind of allowed to rule. And estrogen is amazing, but untethered, it can be, you know, quite problematic in some of the symptoms. So I could completely see a situation where if you're in relative energy deficiency and you've knocked your menstrual cycle out of balance, that could really affect your cycle symptoms. And actually, even though we know that periods often disappear in those with energy deficiency, if you are not ovulating but you still kind of got an estrogen, you know, profile, you might have heavier periods, because estrogen is the hormone that builds up the lining of our womb, uterus, and progesterone is the thing that says, okay, stop now. And then both of those hormones leaving our system triggers the shedding of the uterus for a period. If you haven't got progesterone saying to estrogen, stop building the lining of the uterus, it can kind of make a really thick uterine wall. And then that's a heavier period with heavier period pain.
Yeah. Oh, that totally makes sense. So interesting. Like, these things are so interconnected, right? Like, we need to eat enough of the right things. Like, and like you said before, like getting all those things done first before we start thinking about, like, should we be training differently at different parts of our cycle?
Exactly. You know? Yeah. And there are things we know about on the day of symptoms that can help. But again, unless we've got those pillars in place, that's a really good place to start those foundations. But I think even so, I used to work in Olympic and Paralympic sports. So we used to work with a long jumper called Jasmine Sawyers, and she quite openly came out in 2016 to talk about her really debilitating period pain. And it had stopped her from achieving her goals at the Rio Olympics. Then I think the following year she had to pull out of a world champs, because when she arrived at the competition, first day of her period, and she just was doubled over in pain. And she tried a lot of things. When she first started speaking about it, she said, I haven't tried enough because I've been embarrassed to kind of pursue it. So that was her kind of saying, right, I'm done. Why is something that happens every month getting in my way as an elite athlete? But I met her a few weeks ago, and I sort of said, how's it going? And she said, oh, it's amazing. I found this TENS machine that I was sent, and TENS is like electrical therapy. You kind of, sometimes people have it when they're in labor, and it sends very small electrical shocks into kind of around your abdomen. And the theory is that it interferes with the pain signals. So basically our nerves are electrical signals, and by sort of zapping some more electrical signals in, the pain signals get disturbed. And for her, that was a game changer. She said, oh my goodness, it's absolutely revolutionized my life. Now, I know women who have tried TENS and have said, it feels like someone's just prodding me in the tummy and it's really not for me, which is also what makes this a complicated situation, because not one size fits all, not one solution. But I think for her, it was going through the list of what works. The hormonal contraceptive pill didn't work for her. Taking painkillers proactively was all right, but still didn't really do it. Heat, yes, fine, but she was, and she had to go through all of these strategies, and she finally found one that really works. And I think that's what I'm really passionate about telling athletes and women is, don't just go, oh well, I've got period pain, that's my lot, and oh well, heat and ibuprofen don't work for me. Kind of keep exploring the strategies until you find one that feels like it's doing something.
As a lifelong runner and triathlete turned CrossFitter, I am stoked to announce that the athletic eyewear brand Tifosi Optics has joined us as a partner here at Feisty Media. Tifosi sports glasses hit all the marks for athletes. They're shatterproof polybicarbonate, so the lenses not only reduce glare, but also offer scratch resistance, which I 100% need. They stay in place when you are moving. The hydrophilic rubber nose pads actually get more grippy the more you sweat, so they are secure and don't slide down your face even when you're running in hot conditions. No matter what sport you do, Tifosi has shades for you. Whether you love tennis, fishing, pickleball, running, cycling, or just hanging out on the beach. They are super reasonably priced, which I love, so I can have multiple pairs that go with any outfit. And of course, Feisty listeners get a special discount. So head on over to tifosioptics.com and use the code FM20. FM as in Feisty Media to get 20% off your order. That's FM20 at tifosioptics.com. I'll put a link in the show notes to make it easy for you. For decades, running shoes have been researched, tested, and designed for men. Brands have relied on the shrink it and pink it approach to sell male shoes to female customers. That's why we are so excited to be working with Heddas. Heddas designs athletic footwear for women that elevates performance, safety, and style. Heddas unlocks the science behind women's biomechanics through dedicated research, creates better shoes for women that support their longevity and performance, and establishes new design standards to promote transparency in a male-biased industry. Hedas have a lower ankle collar to reduce rubbing, a breathable mesh toe box to allow for ventilation and to allow for female toe shape, a special kind of plate in the midsole to keep tired legs going, a narrow heel cup to reduce heel slippage and take the pressure off our Achilles, and a rounded instep to create a snug fit. Hedas has 3 shoe models designed for different sessions: the Alma Cruise for long runs, the Alma Tempo for training days, and the Alma Speed for pushing the pace. I've personally been running in the Alma Cruise and I love them. It's the shoe I always wanted and never knew I needed. The fit is perfect in every way. You can get your own pair of Hedas at hedas.com and use the code feisty20 for 20% off. That's feisty20 at hedas.com, and it will all be in the show notes. Endurance sports should be accessible to everyone, right? That's why we are so excited to be partnering with Motive. Motive is one of the fastest growing training apps in the world today, with thousands of amateur athletes signing up every month and a nearly perfect 4.9 star rating in the App Store. You are not a template, and your training plan should not be either. Prepare for running races, triathlons, cycling events, duathlons, or swim runs, however your season schedule shapes up, and get training written by some of the best coaches in the world in each discipline who know what it takes to help amateur athletes reach their goal on race day. The app takes the training written by those experts and then creates the most optimal training plan for your schedule, abilities, and goals. Plus, the training is fully customized to your race schedule, how much you can train each week, your current abilities, and the goals you want to achieve in your race. You can use the app for free as long as you want, or get all the upgraded features from the app for just $19.99 a month. But as a Feisty listener, you can sign up at mymotive.com and use the code FEISTY for 2 months of full premium access. That's right, you get 2 months of premium for free. So you quite literally have nothing to lose. So head over to mymotive.com, MYMOTTIV.com, and use the code FEISTY, FEISTY. And on a personal note, I know the founder of Motive, and he is driven to make triathlon and all endurance sports more accessible for the athletes who care about their performance, but who aren't quite ready for a full-time personal coach. If that sounds like you, definitely try the app for 2 months for free. You literally have nothing to lose.
And what about, you brought up contraceptives there. What do you recommend for athletes? Like, I can remember I was a triathlete and this was a big conversation. Like we would sometimes use the pill to knock off our cycle so that we wouldn't get our period during a race. Some people thought the pill was amazing. Some people hated it. I personally had mood shifts with it, eventually ended up on a hormonal IUD. Like, what do you recommend?
Yeah. Isn't it? Again, it's so individual. And that's what's really hard and also it's kind of a long game, because when you go onto a new hormonal contraceptive, you kind of need to give it 3 months to decide whether it's working for you. Now, some people will know straight away, but usually doctors say 3 months. And if it's not, then you've got another 3 month journey into fight. So it's really, really frustrating. But I think there is no right or wrong. And athletes often say to me, is it good to use the pill or not? And I was like, well, it depends on why you're using the pill, because it's really good to stop unplanned pregnancies. And, right. If that's like your priority here, then do that, because, that would be a biggest performance limitation. But you're right. Lots of athletes use it for symptom management. Lots of athletes use it to make the cycle more predictable. And I think as long as it works for you, at the moment, we don't have enough evidence to say, oh gosh, don't ever use the pill. I think what we've got into a situation is where women are being given the pill and they're not making informed decisions. So they don't know that it's going to have symptoms and side effects. So they're not, and they're not weighing up whether that's worth it. And they kind of, don't know they have choice. often. They, given the first thing that the GP gives them, and they're like, oh, that's the pill I'm meant to be on. Whereas, as you found out, there are different things that might work for different women. I think the IUD is the hormonal IUD is a really, for me, kind of great approach to contraception, because it gives you hormonal contraception. It keeps your womb really healthy because it's delivering progesterone locally to your womb. But the evidence does show that you actually have sort of a more natural cycle in the background. So your body is getting like sort of monthly dose of estrogen and progesterone. And for me, that would be like the perfect scenario. If you need contraception and you want to use, you want something to fit and forget, but you also want your body to benefit from the amazing hormones that our menstrual cycle gives us, then that's kind of a cool, thing that ticks all the boxes, if it works for you. Now, we know that some women will have the IUD fitted and have really, horrible physical or emotional responses. But yeah, I think actually some of the interesting research that I was listening to last week was this idea that we don't really know the long-term effects of hormonal contraception for athletes. But some of the work coming out of a Spanish research group was showing that I think it was markers of bone turnover seemed to be compromised in those women who were taking the pill. And so I asked them all, have you done any like bone density scans on women who have taken the pill for a long time? And she said, yes, they've done scans in women who've taken, I think it was for 5 years or more. And they did see decreased bone density in, I think it was spine and another area on the DEXA scan.
Wow. Because
we know estrogen is so important for bone strength, like building bone. And maybe the oral contraceptive pill, the synthetic version of estrogen, just isn't quite hitting the mark. And again, this is very, early kind of data. And I wouldn't want anyone to be like, oh, I'm just going to stop using the pill. Like, we make these decisions for many reasons. And no one has developed, osteoporosis by being on the pill. But that's a really interesting avenue of research to pursue, because if there are some types of hormonal contraception which actually do impact bone strength and bone health, then for athletes, we would want to know about that. There is one, the depot injection, where there was a couple of really important research papers which showed that it did impact bone strength and bone density, and they didn't know whether that was reversible once you stop using it. And for that reason, I know when I was working in the English high performance system, the doctors steered athletes away from that type of hormonal contraception. So the more information we have, the better we can make informed decisions.
Right. And when are we going to have the male pill? Because that's, maybe you don't know about this specifically.
When is it not going to be our responsibility?
Exactly. Or then if you have a heterosexual couple and the man is not an athlete, then he can take those risks.
Yeah, exactly. It would be nice to be like a co-decision rather than just always having to rely on the women. But yeah, that would be nice.
Is there anything in sort of either at the conference or in recent studies that have surprised you a little bit about about female athlete performance?
I mean, it always surprises me how little we know. It's really depressing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And I think it's because, something like the menstrual cycle is so intriguing. And we always kind of create more questions than we answer even when we study it. So that's always, kind of a sad surprise. And I think one of the things that I took home from this conference, and it's not necessarily to do with female athlete health, but it's to do with being a woman in sport, was the prevalence of physical and emotional abuse still in sport. So at the conference, there was someone from Safe Sport, which in the US is kind of your way of trying to manage abuse in sport. And it's amazing because, you've had some really brilliant strategic investment into that in the wake of the gymnastics Larry Nassar scandal. And they were saying they had 150 reports per week since the week they opened right through to the present day.
That's
and the role
crazy.
Isn't it? Yeah,
that's so surprising, actually.
Yeah, I was really surprised by the numbers. And also how important the parents were in that, sort of that process of disclosure, but also like holding a mirror up as as a parent and saying like, what am I prioritizing here? Am I prioritizing my daughter, or am I like, as in my daughter and her safety, or am I trying to pursue my daughter's dream and just kind of like having a blind eye to some of the stuff that's going on? And just those stories that were being told in that session were really just kind of got to me, because if sport isn't safe, then it doesn't matter how much research we generate around female athlete health, like the bottom line is women aren't safe there. So for me that was really shocking, and there is brilliant work being done about it, but I think we have got a lot of work to do to undo what sport has become for girls and women, which is kind of sad. Is a positive direction for sure, and brilliant to see actual resource rather than just lip service going into that.
It's I one thing I was struck by from the conference was how the recognition a little bit that everything is kind of interconnected, like the issues with safe sport, and which like feeds into like almost like an institutionalized sexism in sport, that we know that sport was kind of made by men for men, and we're trying to add women in and figure out how to be fair, and everything kind of comes from that same, is like in that same, I don't know what you call it, like bubble, right? So like the reasons, for example, why like more women are getting ACL tears in team sports, right, is like we used to think, oh, well, women just get injured more, right? And that's like, well, wait a second, they have worse, they don't have as many doctors on the pitch when they're playing. They're more likely to be put back out on the field right away instead of dealing with the injury or the concussion or whatever it is. And so like all of these things play, it's not necessarily something about female physiology that makes us worse at recovering from an injury. So I think there was this recognition that I really appreciated, that all of these things are ultimately interconnected, and that girls and women being safe in sport and also having more information about how to perform or optimize performance are all related.
100%. And I a couple of years ago I tried to kind of capture that in an ecosystems model, and kind of in the middle I had the athlete, but I was like, even when you're talking about menstrual cycles or breast health or pelvic health or nutrition, like there are ecosystems around all of those topics which are so important, like the attitudes and beliefs of the coach, like the attitudes and beliefs of your culture, your society, your parents, like even your ability to track your menstrual cycle and say the word period is influenced by things that aren't related to the menstrual cycle. And then, the ecosystems kind of go out to this more broad ecosystem, which is that society isn't yet equal, that women have only been in sport for a smaller fraction of time, than the men have been here, and that we don't have enough women on boards of sport, in governance of sport. And all of those things feed that, kind of influence, don't they? And I think that you're right. That was really, there's a realization now that we can't stay in silos, and that you can't just, even if you're a physiologist examining the, physiology of the menstrual cycle, if you want to be a really impactful physiologist in the sports science world, you have to consider what is going to influence the ability of that to be integrated into sport. And often it's not that the coach doesn't understand physiology. It's like like you say, there is a lot of men in that space who don't even, haven't even realized that the menstrual cycle is a thing, or have been, deeply embarrassed by talking about the menstrual cycle, or all these other factors. So that interconnectedness for me is just fascinating, because it's what will help us bring this stuff to life in the end, if we kind of understand those connections.
And the speed of change right now is just incredible, right? I want to talk a bit about the Well HQ and find out like how it's yourself, Bella, and Baz. How did you three meet and come together and see the need to create the resources that you're creating?
Thank you for asking. So as I say, I was working in Olympic and Paralympic sport, and I'd been an academic before, and then just after 2012 I'd been asked to go and head up the physiology team at the EIS, the English Institute of Sport, which was a really exciting move for me, especially in the UK just after London Olympics. Our high performance system was like just in overdrive, and we've been set this really ambitious target to beat our medal tally in Rio, and so it's just a great place, really challenging, and that's where I first learned almost about these interconnections, not specifically around female health, but I came from as an academic going, like we could do all this cool science with these sports people, and realizing just to get them to do the basics really well was really difficult. And like, I remember we were just doing this project on a warm-up with track cycling, and kind of saying, wow, I think we could improve peak power off the line if we included some of this high intensity work in the warm-up. And we were all very excited with the data. And we went to kind of the coaches, and the coach is like, I've been warming up the same way for 20 years. Like, that's never going to change. And we were like, oh, and eventually, you know, we did, but we realized then it was about behavior change and influence and relationships, and not about the science. So I kind of learned my lessons along the way. And then after 2016 Olympics, we had this debrief from Rio and kind of like preparing for the journey to Tokyo. And I kind of, at the time, raised a question about how well do we support our female athletes? I kind of had been in the system then for 4 or 5 years and had never heard anyone talk about periods, menstrual cycles, sports bras. And I'd heard lots of people talking about priming and testosterone and cortisol, and, you know, like hormones. And I just hadn't heard anything about being female. So I asked the question, and people were like, oh, we probably do talk about it. But I was, you know, kind of given the sort of opportunity to go and investigate whether we were doing a good job. And I spent 6 months just talking to people, talking to coaches and athletes, and saying, you know, like, do we think we really acknowledge the female part of female athletes as well as just them being athletes? And ultimately the answer was no. And the answer was, oh gosh, should we? Like, we have literally no idea. So then we thought, well, because people didn't even know what they didn't know, we'll start off by educating. That felt like a really good space to start, because we kind of thought, well, we could invest some money in research, but we have got people here who don't even have conversations about periods or anything, and don't even know why it's important. So why don't we start there? So I started educating, and I realized there was this huge gap. And along the way I realized that I think we often get sort of focused on menstrual cycle, but that there was all these extraordinarily interesting topics to do with being a female in sport that either happened only in female bodies or differently in female bodies. And that actually educating everyone on the breadth of what it means to be a female in sport. And as you say, trying to make the connections between what that looks like in real life. So I thought I'd do like a year of education before we went to the next level. But 4 years later, I was still educating.
Right.
Yeah, because the need was so great. And so I was like, you know what, this is brilliant. Like, I really love this. I kind of felt like I'd found something for me that really lit me up. So in 2020, I moved out of that role because I wanted to broaden the reach of the work. I knew that I was only hitting Olympic and Paralympic sports at the highest level. And actually, they're already quite privileged athletes. They have nutritionists and psychologists and physiologists. Right. And there's like a ton of people from, you know, podium potential right through to grassroots sport, college athletes, high school student athletes who need support and need information. So I kind of stepped out of that role with that in mind. And along the way, I'd met Baz. She's a former GB rower, and she had been doing women's health coaching, particularly with a focus on pelvic floor health in London. And she wanted to broaden the reach of her work, because what she was finding was that pelvic health and pelvic floor work wasn't just a postnatal thing, and that it was, you know, important for women across their life, and was, you know, dysfunction was prevalent even in young athletic girls. So she kind of had the same mission as me to broaden the reach. And she had also been working with Dr. Bella more recently on talking to women about the menopause and staying active through the menopause, because Dr. Bella is a GP, but she has specialist training in women's health and the menopause. So we kind of, serendipity really brought us together, in that we were all on a similar mission, came and didn't know each other at all. And I'm like, well, I've just quit my job to try and do this. And Baz was like, yeah, I want to do this, you know, like, we'll broaden our reach. And Bella was like, oh, this would be amazing. So yeah, we said, come, let's do something. And that's kind of where the well started. We knew we wanted to fill that gap of connecting research into practice. We didn't really know what it would look like. We started writing a book because we knew there needed to be a book. We just didn't have anywhere to send people. But over the course of the last 3 years, we've kind of worked to create our own resources online. So whether that's the free stuff that's on our website, or courses that people can come on to learn about coaching girls and women, or the work we've done with sports. So we've worked with England Netball, which is a sport a bit like basketball here in the UK, and really help them strategically change their approach to women's health across the board. They are a sport where they have girls who are as young as 8 right through to women who are, you know, in their 80s playing. And so actually it was a great sport to be able to say, let's understand life stages, let's get coaches really educated on menopause, on puberty, on postnatal. So we've worked a lot with them. And then we've just started some work. Well, we did a big project with the FA last year about football, what it's like to be a woman in football and how well you're supported as a female. And now from the findings of that, we're rolling out training. And so we kind of, we fill that space around coach education, but we want to hold sports to account. So this is not a one and done situation. This is not about a 1 hour webinar. This is like, how do you embed this stuff? So as we have done with mental health in sport, it's an ongoing journey, but we have said that like this needs to be integrated and just part and parcel of how we create the environment, how we coach. And that's what we need with female athlete health. And that's going to take time, and it's going to take a commitment from sports to kind of really commit to it, to say from grassroots to participation, coaches who are coaching women need to know about women. So yeah, that's our mission.
That's amazing. It's funny because like I used to, as an elite athlete, like I used to make a joke that like I got all my female health information like through oral tradition, you know, like because I also studied ancient history, so I'm aware that like that's how like women pass information, and like we're still getting information from oral tradition, literally like the women who were pro triathletes and the generation ahead of me told me how they dealt with menstrual symptoms, how they dealt with contraceptives, etc., right? Or how they chose their bike saddle to make sure that they weren't crushing their bits, right? Like, so like all of those things weren't part of like the structure of however we were supported as elite athletes, right? So like seeing all that change, like now on the flip side, now running a media and education company around all of that stuff. Now I have coaches coming to us and saying like, how do I get educated on this stuff? It's like a complete reversal. So it's so cool to see. But you guys wrote a book called The Female Body Bible. Was launched recently, right?
Yeah, we just launched it maybe a month ago.
Right. And how's it been received?
So, I mean, so good. Like we worked really hard on it, and we were going to self-publish it because we were like, we're just going to kind of launch it into our world. And that's all you want to do. We want everyone in our world to know this. And then an agent kind of was on one of our webinars, I think, and we were kind of talking about it. And she said, please let me pitch it to a couple of publishing houses, because I think like there's a gap for this. And so she did, and in the end, we were signed by Penguin, which was amazing, Penguin Random House, and it allowed us to go through this kind of really cool publishing process, which she'd never done, and also really helped us make the book applicable. Not just, I think we'd come in with kind of an athlete perspective, but now this is like the whole point of the book is anyone who wants to be active to not let their body hold them back. So as a female, so, you know, we talk about the menstrual cycle, we talk about sports bras, talk about pelvic health. And these are all things we know are barriers to participation, and then also have an impact on performance. So we kind of broadened our kind of narrative, I guess, to reach anyone who wanted to be active as a female. And then we put it into the world, and that's the scariest moment, because you're like, oh God, someone's going to read it and go, what is this? And then all of our dreams will come crashing down. But no, we worked really hard on it. It's a really evidence-based book. It's got a ton of references in, but we have tried to make the actual book itself really accessible and engaging, because, you know, like we're busy people. We want to kind of dip into books, learn some stuff, not have to decipher it and translate it, but know and trust that it's credible. And everyone has been super positive. And the nicest thing is that we've had teachers, you know, PE teachers who have, you know, messaged us and say they've got it, coaches, dads, mums. So it's really kind of gone far, and that's what we wanted. It's about women, but it's not exclusively for women, although it's kind of written for females. We do want men to pick it up, and we do want male coaches to pick it up and just like really open their eyes to some of this stuff. And I think, you know, I think we've had, I don't read the reviews, Sarah, but my Bella likes to have a little look occasionally, and we've had really positive reviews, and there's been a couple of negative ones they've really stuck out, and we're like, oh gosh. And I think one was like, oh, you know, it's kind of just sounds too popularized. And I was like, you know, you kind of reflect, and I'm like, no, I'm really happy with how we've written it. Have you read it?
I have not.
No, so I was going to ask your opinion, but I think from what we've heard, people, it's really landing. like, you know, in a way that feels weighty enough to like be meaningful, but not so heavy that it's like really hard to plow through. So we kind of like, okay, that's the sense check there. And another person was listening to the audiobook and they're like, oh, it hasn't got any references. And I'm like, oh no, how do you know on an audiobook actually where the references are? So yeah, that's one of the things we're really proud of, is that it has tons of references. So if you're that person who likes to go and delve into the actual original research, you can, but equally you do not have to, because we know that that is sometimes like not what everyone has time for. So we have been delighted, and kind of, we just want it to kind of be an evergreen book. We want to go back to it each year and make sure it's current. And hopefully that will give us a real barometer of how we're progressing. And we'd love for it, a bit like you were saying, kind of that, you know, like you're passing down information from generations of athletes down to, we want this to be passed on from like a mum to her daughter and down generations, because we wrote it because there is no one telling us about our bodies in the context of physical activity and sport. So, you know, we do learn a little bit, nowhere near enough, about our bodies as women, but like when we come to moving them and wanting to get the most out of them, like that presents loads more challenges, and you're like, oh, okay, what do I do now?
Yeah, well, that was actually another interesting moment for me at the conference, where just looking at, I think it was Kirstie Elliott-Sale pointing out that like most of the research had been done on the effects of exercise on the menstrual cycle as opposed to the opposite way. And like now and like just what you're saying right there is like, now we're like centering performance. Like how do we move and do all the things we want to do in the world the best way possible as women? You know?
Yeah, exactly. And the book kind of covers all of the topics. So like I said, like you'd be so amazed at how many women don't do exercise because of their breast size, for example. And you're like, for me, you're like, in this day and age, that should not be an issue, because how much technology and money goes into innovation in big brands for sports bras? Why is that connection not being made? Why do women not find what they need? And mostly it's because they don't know what's out there and how to get the right solution. And they just, as women, we're terrible at normalizing things that aren't normal. So I was exactly guilty of that. I like started marathon running when I was in my early 20s. And I paid so much attention to the shoes that I wore, because, you know, blisters are, as we all know, just the worst thing to have. So I went through kind of 3 or 4 brands till I found, you know, the one that really suited my feet, my running style. Yeah, I was wearing 2 sports bras, chafing my skin, having to wear blister plasters under my bra, and thinking that was normal. So, and then, you know, working with a research group on breast movement, breast biomechanics, and learning all we know about the breast in sport. And I was like, how many women are just putting up with that stuff? Whereas actually there are solutions.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I know so many people who wear, even myself, and I don't have big breasts, but like wearing 2 sports bras even at like certain times of the month too, because like when it's painful and you want zero bounce, right? Like, but wearing 2 sports bras was kind of like a normal thing, which sounds just like you said, like we normalized it.
Yeah, whereas, you know, that there are amazing sports bras that like you just need one, like that's the whole point. It's like wearing 2 pairs of leggings. Like I don't know why you would, but it just feels weird. So why do we do it for sports bras? But and so this is kind of like, it's not rocket science, but it's sort of information that has been disconnected from us as women, and we just want to put it in the hands of as many women as we can, so that you know, I always say, like, because I think when I went into sport and started talking about the female body, because women in sport have been trying so hard to get equality, same pay as men, same media exposure, same access to facilities and coaching, same respect, same value, same prioritization. They were like, Emma, don't come in here and like remind everyone that we're female and there's all these parts of us like boobs and menstrual cycles to worry about. And because they were worried that it was seen as a fragility. And I was like, the fragility is in the system which has not educated you about your bodies. The fragility is not in your body. Your body is freaking amazing, like incredible. But the fragility is in a system which has just completely overlooked the fact that you need to know about sports bras and menstrual cycles and pelvic health, and just kind of allowed you to crack on and try anyway. So so that's, for me, that's like so important that we celebrate this female body, and we do that by understanding it better.
That's such a great point, because I that's what I keep thinking about, like my generation of athletes, is that like we just like put our head down and got on with it and didn't think about these things, which is like in some ways it's good. It teaches you mental toughness, but like how much more could we have got out of our bodies if we'd really just taken a minute to think about it, or we'd known to track our cycles or whatever the thing, or to buy the right sports bra,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And Baz was the same. She was a, elite athlete in a system that she will always say she was kind of like, she was in the women's 8 and she was always like the last seat in the boat. So she was just good enough to be on that team, which is incredible. But she was always like on the border. And she was like, as if I would have said, oh, like I have period pain. Right. That would have been the first thing. They're like, okay, well, you're definitely out of the seat. Right. And again, that's really important that we have that conversation. And like I always bring that up. It is particularly in sports. Like we also have to accept that this requires some compassion. So instead of someone going, oh God, okay, well, you're clearly not going to make it. It's like, if they had anything else, like if they were your star player, but they had this weird shoulder thing, you would be working hard with the physio and the osteopath and the chiropractor and the taping and the pills and the injections to make that shoulder right, because that's what's going to help them get the most out of themselves. But if it's anything female, it just doesn't feel like we can bring it. So that we have to change the culture of sport to allow that to happen.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, where can we buy the book?
So the book is available on Amazon. So we made it into an Amazon bestseller list. We made it to the Sunday Times bestseller. Yeah, yay. We made it onto the Sunday Times bestseller list, which is amazing. So yeah, we'd love for people to go out and buy it and equally tell us what you think, because we'd love to hear back. So we've got a paperback copy coming out next year, and we can input into that some new stuff. So yeah, please feedback to us.
Wow, that's fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And then the Well HQ, where do we find the resources online that you have created?
So we have a website, the well-hq.com, and yeah, please go there because we have blogs and articles on lots of these topics and life stages like puberty and menopause. We also just launched netballher.co.uk, and now it doesn't matter if you don't play netball. If you kind of ignore the pictures are all of netballers, there's some amazing resources. We've got infographics that you can kind of download and print. If you're a coach or an athlete who you want to put some information up on your notice board, we've got some posters there. So netballher.co.uk is also another great place to go. And then you can find us on the socials. The Well-HQ is kind of where you'll find us. LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter.
Cool. Amazing. Well, thank you so much. This has been such a fun conversation.
Thank you for letting me ramble on, Sarah. Yeah, thank you. It's been wonderful. It's always lovely to be able to chat about the things like this. Yeah,
for sure. And thanks for all the work that you do.
And to you, thank you. And it was so good to meet you in person.
Yes, likewise.
Yeah.
Building muscle can be tough, and gains can be so slow, even for those of us who do a lot of strength training. As an ex-endurance athlete who is now in perimenopause, I know this all too well. It can be frustrating to put in the time in the gym and not see the results I'm looking for. That's why it's super important to take the right supplements at the right time. One of those supplements is essential amino acids, which are needed to trigger muscle protein synthesis. Muscle protein synthesis happens when you eat high-quality protein, like eggs or whey. And by supplementing with additional essential amino acids, you can make sure you are getting the full benefit of your training sessions. Targeted essential amino acid formulas can be up to 4 times more effective than just eating protein. I've been taking amino acids for almost a year, and in combination with eating quality protein and a couple other supplements, I have managed to turn the tides on age-related muscle loss, which starts at 30 for women, by the way, and I have continued to make strength gains as I head towards 50. AminoCo has been a long-time sponsor of Feisty Media and has supported all of our brands and podcasts over the years. I recommend starting with AminoCo Perform, and you can grab some at aminoco.com/performance. If you enter the code PERFORMANCE, you will save 30% and receive a free gift if it is your first purchase. Give it a try and let me know how it goes. That's aminoco.com/performance and use the code performance to save 30%. As we head into summer, rest and recovery are critical for improving sports performance, reducing stress, and living a long and healthy life. We should all invest in better sleep. So, think about the thing you lay your head on for 8 hours a night. If it's not exactly right for you, it can lead to needless tossing and turning, or worse, have you waking up with an unrelenting kink in your neck. My new Lagoon pillow has helped me improve my sleep immensely by pairing me with the performance pillow that has everything I need. So I personally was matched with the Otter pillow. Shout out to Team Otter, which I love because it has a gentle cooling effect. And I was able to choose how much stuffing I wanted in it, which is super important to me because I'm doing a decent amount of CrossFit these days and my shoulders are kind of creaky. So having a pillow that is stuffed just to the right height keeps my neck and head in exactly the right position and comfortable for the entire night. And as of fall 2023, Lagoon launched their 100% mulberry silk pillowcases. It's cool to the touch, buttery soft, and great for your skin and hair. You've got to go check out this pillowcase if you want to feel great and look great every morning. Waking up for morning workouts has never felt better. I'm refreshed and pain-free thanks to my Lagoon pillow. To check it out for yourself, go to lagoonsleep.com/performance and take the 2-minute sleep quiz to find your perfect pillow match. And then use the code PERFORMANCE for 15% off your first purchase. That's code PERFORMANCE at lagoonsleep.com/performance, whole 15% off, and the link is in the show notes. You can just click through there.